All right, welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of Lessons from Terrible Students. As always, we are the Terrible Students. My name is Jeremy. That's Sarah. Sarah, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
So, once again, we have another guest speaker with us here today, but as always, we're going to make them wait a little bit before we introduce them. Today's episode is all about audio. So, that's music and voiceover and how we use that in learning and development, and some best practices around some of the hardware and some of the theory behind using voiceover and music in learning and development. So before we get too far into that, as always, this podcast is brought to you by Lumius. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. As I said, we have another guest here with us. We call him a guest speaker, but Sarah and I both have worked with Ryan for a few years now. Sarah has worked with Ryan for a lot longer than I have, but we are all Lumius employees, and this is kind of our A team at Lumius, if I could say so
That's
myself.
Right.
Ryan, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background and why we kind of brought you on to be our audio/music expert.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jeremy. Ryan Duhon here, senior instructional designer with Jeremy and Sarah at Lumius. Like Jeremy said, we've worked together for a few years, and Sarah and I go back several more years in the work environment. So, I've been doing L&D work for, it's about 10 years now. But as I suspect it is for a lot of people, you were kind of doing a lot of it while in a different role before officially being moved into this role. I believe that's the case for you guys as well.
Yep.
Yep.
How I really got into L&D work was just really through a company need. And I had previous teaching experience. So my background is I have a degree in music education, and I've done the band directing thing. I've taught private saxophone lessons, and that's really what got me my start in the L&D world.
Awesome. That is, I have the utmost respect for anybody that can play an instrument. That's always something that I've wanted to do, started to do a few times on a few different instruments, and went, holy crap, this is way too hard, and I do not have the patience to do this, and give up very early in my pursuit of trying to do that.
That is how it goes for most people. Yeah.
So, all right, so what we're talking about today, we'll talk about music a little later. What I want to talk about first is voiceover. And early in Lessons of Terrible Students, we did kind of a hardware and software episode talking about some of the things you might need just kind of in general for learning and development. And we touched on some things for voiceover quickly in that episode. But I wanted to bring that back up in this episode to get kind of your thoughts on this. So when we're talking about doing voiceover for learning and development, there are two kind of routes that you can do that. One, if you want really great voiceover, is to pay somebody to do that. That's always, and please stop me if I'm wrong here, obviously, but that's always probably going to give you the best quality voiceover audio because they just have the setup to do it. And we'll go through here in just a little bit of what some of those setups look like and all that kind of stuff. But for the most quality voiceover, there are services out there where you basically send them a script and then they just send you, their actors that are professional voiceover actors reading those lines. So that's, as far as I know, that's always going to be probably the best way to do that. So setting that aside, let's talk about if we wanted to record some audio ourselves, right? So from a hardware software point of view, what are kind of your thoughts on setting up your own system to do that without having to pay somebody else to do it?
Yeah, and so I kind of want to echo what you just said as well. Like, a professional voiceover artist is pretty much going to be the highest quality that you can get. It's also very expensive, right? And it's the highest quality because they have the know-how, the experience, they have the best equipment and the best software, right? So when we start talking about software and equipment, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that you can close the gap in quality between what you can do and what a professional VO artist can do quite a bit. Unless you are set up like them, you're never going to, like you said, get to that highest level of quality. But I feel like a lot of people, once they start trying this, are surprised that they can get a lot closer than they initially thought if they really think about it. And I'm not talking about something that takes a whole lot of budget. I was never trained in this type of stuff. The way that I have learned how to do this stuff has just been through trial and error, research, and budgetary constraints. Really, it's stop me if you've heard this story before. A company comes to you, they want to make some training, they want X, Y, and Z. Oh, and by the way, here's $100 to make it happen. You know what I mean? So that's when you really start exploring what those options are. So like a professional VO artist, they may use like a high-end Shure microphone that probably costs close to $1,000. You're not going to get that exact quality, but you can get closer than you think with some cheaper options. My favorite are the Blue microphones. I personally use a Blue Yeti to do this type of stuff. There's also the Blue Snowball, which is a little bit cheaper, but it's not quite as high quality as the Blue Yeti. I would recommend, just like if you really want to do this type of stuff, go ahead and invest in like a Blue Yeti. That may be like $200 or something like that, depending upon what kind of sales that you can get. Again, versus $1,000, like the high-end Shure microphones that you're going to see, like the YouTubers that do that full time, or a professional VO artist that'll use. So that's your microphone. The bottom line of it, though, is you want to make sure you're not using like your laptop microphone or your webcam microphone. That type of stuff is not really meant for this. You want something that is high enough quality, but is not going to break the bank, essentially. When it comes to software, there's lots of different options out there. There are free options that will get you a lot of what you want. My favorite on PC is Audacity. On Apple, I think you can get that on Apple as well. But Apple also has like their built-in audio editor as well, which does a decent job. And that's gonna help you record. That's gonna help you set the volume. That's gonna help you, slice and dice and put things together. But there are certain things that it's not going to be able to do that other software will. And it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive software. So a lot of us, when we are developing, we use the Adobe Suite. And we use it for lots of different reasons. The Adobe Suite also comes with Audition, which is their version of the audio editor. And there's some things that it will be able to do that your basic free options aren't going to be able to do. But it really just depends on what you're trying, what your end goal is. When I'm doing voiceover, the reason that I really like something like Audition over something like Audacity is that it has a lot of very flexible filters. So you go back and you talk about the voiceover, professional voiceover artists, right? We talked about how they have the experience, they have the know-how. Those are two things that you can get over time. They have the equipment, you can get close to that on a budget. They have the software, you can get close to that on a budget. The one thing you really can't change that they probably have is voice quality, right? You either have a radio voice or a good recording voice, or you don't. Some of you listening to this may have noticed I don't. I tend to liken my voice quality to someone strangling a cat. It's not great. There's not a whole lot
that's
of
a bit self-deprecating, but
I can be that way, but at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of bass in my voice. And look, we all know that when we record ourselves and we listen back, it is dramatically different than the way we hear ourselves.
Oh yeah,
so
that's
that going on, right? But that may be going on with a lot of you as well, and you just don't like to listen to your own voice. Well, something like Audition can help with that. I have certain filters that I always use that adds a little bit of bass to my voice, makes it sound more like, a human. And there's lots of options for you to do that. When you go in to do that the first time, you're going to look at all the different options they have, and you're going to be like, I don't know what to do with any of this. The way that I decided upon what I do to my voice is simply by, and you're going to hear me say this probably multiple times in this podcast, I went to YouTube and I watched YouTube videos about those filters and got recommendations. And then I went and played around with it and found what worked for my voice. So, none of us can tell you these are the filters and options that you should use because your voice is different than mine. For me, I tend to, within the Adobe suite, I work with the dynamics filter and the mastering filter. And then I have specific settings that I set for each of those that work for my voice. But again, that's just me. And the only way I found that out was through trial and error and getting recommendations through YouTube videos, which, by the way, YouTube videos is how I learned to do all of this to begin with. It is a really underutilized resource that I feel like we have at our disposal when it comes to development like this. And yes, you may say it's kind of a Wild West. Anyone can put anything up. But if you do a quick search on how to use this type of software and how to do these kind of recordings, you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of videos. And if you watch enough of them, you're going to see a lot of them start to say the same things. And that's how you can trust it versus just watching one video and who knows if they know what they're talking about or not. So it's sort of a community effort there. But yeah, that is, it may not, these filters also may not be needed for you. It just really depends on the person and the voice quality. So
yeah, I haven't found one that can take out the Southern drawl yet, so I haven't.
Well, I don't know that you're going to find that.
I don't want that to go anywhere, Jeremy.
With AI on the rise, maybe one day, right? But
maybe it'll give me like a Bostonian accent one day.
Hopefully, maybe. I'm thinking English for you, but yeah. So there's lots of options out there with that, and again, it may not even be needed. But I do know that I've talked to a lot of people that this is their barrier to even trying doing their own voiceovers. My voice isn't good. I hate the quality of my voice. There's a certain amount of just getting over that, right? But there are also things that you can do to your voice when you're recording on a higher quality microphone that will help with that.
That's a good point. I hate listening to myself. It's hard for me to watch these podcasts sometimes over. I'm like, why do I sound so nasally?
There's scientific reasons for it, right? And this was something that I sort of discovered when teaching music, that in music, it's a good practice to record yourself and listen back. There's lots of things that you may be doing that you don't notice when you're playing, but on top of it, you will hear yourself differently in your tone quality and your expression, right? And it's sort of the same thing for the voice. It has to do with how, when I'm talking right now, the sound waves they're not passing through air entirely to get to my eardrum and to be processed by my ears. It's through like the flesh and bone and all of that stuff. When you and I talk, it's not the same. It's propagating through the air, and so it changes the quality of it quite a bit. So that's essentially the reason that we sound different when we record ourselves, other than the fact that a recording sort of changes the quality to begin with. But so that would be the case for everyone.
Drop the science on them.
I was going to say a little nugget of knowledge. Thank you, Ryan.
It's the science.
Okay, so that's kind of the hardware and software piece. But there's one more part of this, and that's where you choose to record. And it goes a little bit into that, little scientific nugget that you just dropped, right? So that's actually a pretty good transition into kind of how to set up your recording space. So why don't we go into, why don't you go into how to set up a good quality recording space and what goes into that?
Sure. Yeah. So right now, as I'm talking to you guys, I'm in my office. Microphone is over here sitting on the desk. This is not where I would try to record voiceover. It's just not. If you're going for higher quality, and this goes back to when we think about professional voiceover artists and the things that we said that they have, like they have the setup as well. It's not just the equipment. But when you're talking about where you can record, you don't have to have a professionally made studio. If you think about a professionally made studio, what are some of the qualities of it? You're just like a recording artist, or you can also think about like a concert hall. If you've ever been to like a concert hall, you may notice that the ceiling is not just a ceiling, right? There's a design to it. On the walls, you may see some designs on the walls, not just a flat wall. And these are all very purposeful to how the sound gets to the audience and how the sound is heard. Same thing in a recording studio, you may see like fabric on the walls, right? The purpose of the fabric on the walls is to do what we call dampening the sound. So when I speak and I have a microphone in front of me, I speak my voice, the sound waves go everywhere, and they're going to bounce off the walls and they're going to come back at the microphone. And that's going to give us sort of an echoey effect. Dampening is what we refer to when we're talking about eliminating that echoey effect. So you think about fabric on the walls in a recording studio, that is the purpose that it's serving. It's absorbing that sound and not allowing it to reflect back at the microphone again, so that the microphone is picking up the person's voice or instrument that they may be playing, whatever the case may be. So how does that help us at home? Well, my favorite place to do recordings is I go into my bedroom and I go into my walk-in closet and I sit on the floor in there. And the reason for that is because I have clothes all around me. Mm-hmm. It's a smaller space and clothes everywhere to prevent that echoing sound and absorb my voice, so that what the microphone is picking up is just me and nothing reverberating back from walls. So that's my place of choice. Now, not everyone may have a walk-in closet. You may think about, do you have a smaller room maybe that has how do you put it? I would say a lot of, not necessarily fixtures on the walls, but
maybe like curtains.
Curtains, yeah.
Or, yeah.
A lot of like that.
A shower curtain.
Shower curtain's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
But unless it's a cloth, like if it's cloth. Cloth is really, really good for this.
Right. Yeah.
You just don't want bare walls. Now, if you have like paintings and stuff like that, pictures on the walls, that's better than bare wall. But if it's a hard surface, it's still going to reflect some. So you might have to think about the space that you're working with and where can you go that doesn't have just blank walls. You know what I mean? That's going to be your best bet. And we think about these professional studios that people have. The purpose of that really is so that you can have your desk, your computer, you can have all your systems and everything with you and still be able to record. But you can get 85% of that effect just by going in your closet and having your backdrop be your own clothes. So,
yeah. Or if you were going to do it full time, let's say you wanted to have a side gig and you're trying to be cheap about it. You could even line your closet with, I think we talked about this one time, Ryan, like the egg crate, mattress toppers. Mm-hmm. I know that brings me back to high school and early 2000s when everybody wanted to be a rapper or a singer, and everyone was making makeshift recording studios in their rooms. And that's exactly what they did. They lined their closets with the egg crate mattress toppers.
Yeah, no, that will work as well. That foamy things with foam qualities are going to be really good for this as well. Yeah, and like you talked about, if you were trying to get started in this is a really good way to start. But if you want it to be a career, eventually you probably want to invest in the types of things that professional VO artists have. But if you are a developer and you're making something that needs voiceover and it's just simply not in your budget, you can make it work at home if you really think about why those fancy setups are the way they are.
Yeah, and speaking of that, let's double back slightly to, because we talked about microphones a little bit. Let's double back to kind of some of the, because a lot microphones are not all built the same, right? But they're all basically dealing with the same things. So there are some microphones that have different settings. Because if you're buying like a Blue Yeti microphone, it's got a bunch of buttons on it. It's not just a device that you plug in and that it just works. Like most of the super cheap ones, like the $10, $20 ones you buy, it's just kind of a plug and play device. There's no additional thing to it. And that's when you get like the really tinny, crappy sounding audio from it. But when you go into that, what I would call mid-range, lower to mid-range that we're talking about, like the Blue Yetis and stuff like that, that's when you start getting some additional settings and things like that you have to watch out for. Can you kind of describe what you're looking out for there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will talk in terms mostly of the Blue Yeti, but there are other microphones that will have similar settings to them. So yeah, the Blue Yeti has a dial on the back, and it's got lots of different shapes. And to really understand what those shapes are for, I mean, simply look at the manual. The manual explains all of them in their different use cases because they are for different use cases. The one that you would want to do if you're just doing a voiceover is what's called, I always mispronounce it, but it's the cardioid effect. And that's the one that's shaped like a heart. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell the microphone, okay, we're only going to record on one side of the microphone. It's going to be the side that has the blue logo on it. So basically the opposite side from the dial. So it is going to just listen in front of you. And you want that, again, it goes back to the dampening. You don't want it picking up reflections from behind the microphone. Now, depending upon your use case, there are other settings. It has an omnidirectional where it's listening all over. It has one where it's listening just in the front and the back. And people use that a lot for in-person podcasts because there may be one person on one side of the microphone, one person on the other side of the microphone. And so it's listening just on both sides, but not the other sides. So yeah, there's different settings for different use cases, but if you're just doing basic VO, use the cardioid, the one that's shaped like a heart, and it will just be listening in front of you. And specific to the Blue Yeti, this is not necessarily something that applies to all other microphones. But for all microphones, just, like we said, read the instructions on how they work, because it may not necessarily be as intuitive as you may think. So like the Blue Yetis, I will see this a lot. Like if I'm watching YouTube videos of someone, the Blue Yeti is, if you haven't seen one, it's just a straight up microphone. And at the top, it's got like the cap that we see usually with microphones. And what people want to do is bend it to where the top of it is facing at them. This is sort of like, you watch TV and someone's holding a microphone, it's like this, right? Because those microphones are listening at the top. But the Blue Yeti, it's not doing that. It's listening in front. It's listening all around it. So it's not a huge deal, like if that's the way that you record with it. But the highest quality is going to be just talking into the side of it, talking into the side with the blue the logo itself. So like that's its settings, but there's more to it as well to get quality out of these microphones. You'll notice that a lot of microphones have a gain dial. And gain is just basically how much of your voice is it going to pick up. At least for my recordings, I turn that all the way down. And I'm also not right on top of the microphone because you can very easily overload the microphones. And this, you can test that by, you get on your computer, you connect it, you start recording, and most audio recording software will have a little gauge in there, and it will tell you how loud it is, and it will use colors to tell you. If it's green, if it's yellow, if it gets up into the red. And the problem with getting up into the red, right, is then you listen back to it, and it just sounds overloaded. Things aren't clear because it's trying to pick up too much of your voice. These lower to mid-range, getting into the upper range microphones are much more sensitive than you may think. So you don't have to be right on top of them. When I'm recording, so hey, just to paint a picture of you, I'm recording on the floor of my walk-in closet with my clothes surrounding me. I've got my laptop, I've got my microphone, The microphone is probably a foot and a half, 2 feet away from me, maybe a little bit more, and the gain is all the way down. Again, this is going to depend on the person. This is going to depend on environmental factors, and you kind of have to test it out. But that gain, consider keeping it pretty low if you don't want to overload it. And then you can adjust the volume within your software if you need to after the fact.
And I think that's a good point to call out, because and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you would rather dial up the volume in the software than have to try to reduce the volume in the software. So, because for me, I found a lot of times if I don't reduce that gain a good bit, because I'm a relatively loud guy, like I end up redlining, which is just what I call it in my head, right? Because I'm always seeing that red line spiking whenever I'm talking. So like I've got to reduce my gain on everything that I have, or else my computer just feels like I'm shouting at it all the time, apparently. But I've tried to kind of reduce my own volume, but usually, and voiceover, this may not be the case, but usually I'm not talking by myself. So for like this podcast, if I reduce my volume, it's very hard to go in and just find the sections where it's just me. So it takes a lot more time in that post-processing to try to reduce just the Jeremy volume, while not completely, drowning out everybody else that's on the podcast as well. Because apparently I'm a loud guy. What are you going to do?
Well, and that's a good point, too. You want to be able to speak how you naturally speak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't want to try to adjust the way that you speak to accommodate the microphone. Have the microphone accommodate you. And the other issue you may run into when you're, like you said, redlining when you're recording is you may try to reduce that volume in the software, but since it was recorded on overload, you can reduce the volume, but it may not get rid of that sort of overloaded sound that you may get. It will just be quieter, but it won't be clearer. It will still be overloaded sounding. I don't know a better way to describe that other than that. It's just not clear.
Yep. Okay, so that's kind of our, I guess I'll say mid-level. I didn't want to say high level because we did go into a little bit of detail there, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we could spend probably the rest of the podcast just talking about kind of hardware and software. But there was one more piece I wanted to talk about as we shift slightly. So everything we've talked about so far is for voiceover. So that's when you are speaking to a microphone, it's recording your voice. Typically, you're reading a script, something like that. But I wanted to kind of shift gears slightly to something that I don't think gets really thought about a lot when it comes to learning and development, because I feel like all learning and development, I'll hedge my bets, and we'll say most learning and development videos have voiceover, right? But I don't know if all of them use background music like they should. Mm-hmm. So let's go into a little bit there, and I'll start off with the obvious question, like why should we even bother adding some kind of background music or any kind of music at all to a training video? We've got our visuals there, so that's something for our learners to look at. We've got our voiceover, that's what's teaching them what they need to know. So why add that extra layer of complexity onto it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, right? Like from the learner perspective, it adds interest. From the stakeholder perspective, it really ups the production value. And it's an easy thing, relatively easy thing to do, to make your videos pop a little bit more, hold interest, and the end result just seeming like much higher quality. Even though the video itself is not any different, it makes the video just seem higher quality, especially to the stakeholders and things like that. So think about this, like you're watching TV and a commercial comes on for whatever. It doesn't matter what it's for. I hate watching commercials, by the way, but they do fascinate me from a learning and development perspective. But when those videos come on, do any of them not have music?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen one that didn't have some type of jingle or some type of something.
Background, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you watch like a hype video for a sports team or something. They all have
Huge
music.
part of those.
Always.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So especially if you're working on learning where it's not just like a standalone video and it's like a series of modules that will have videos, you know, the music can sort of be a theme that goes throughout, and it can help tie like the information memory for the learner. So there's lots of different reasons that you would use it. And when you compare the effect that it will have on the video itself all around, not just for the learner, but like if you were selling this to a company, you know, it just pops a little bit, well, a lot more, frankly. But when you compare that to the level of effort it takes, it's really just an extra step or two. You know, most of your effort in making some sort of educational video is going to be on the animation or the editing or transition effects or these type of things, scripting, VO recording, putting all that in, lining everything up with the VO. That is 90% of your effort. You can add a little bit of extra effort to add a whole lot of extra quality to it, and that's just with background music.
Okay, so we know we need background music, but where do we get it? Because we have the same considerations as we always have, right? We want to make sure that we've got the rights to the music. We can't just like go and download a top 10 hit and drop it in our video, right? Like it's definitely awesome. Not something unless we want to be sued 6 Way from Sunday, right? So where do you get royalty-free music? Like what are the resources available to get something like that?
Well, I'll tell you my go-to place, but before I do that, I think you hit the nail on the head. Royalty-free music. If you open up Google and you type in royalty-free music, you're going to find a lot of sites that will offer this stuff. Now, whenever you go to a site, you want to investigate it before you just start using their music. You want to read their licensing and try to understand the ins and outs of what they have to offer. My favorite place is Pixabay, Pixaby, B-A-Y? Let me look. Yeah, Pixabay, Pixabay. That's my favorite place. And the reason that I like it is it's all royalty-free music. When you download something, it will include a link that they will ask, hey, if you're able to, hey, please, it'd be nice if you included this link that sort of says, hey, this is where the music came from, but it's not necessarily required. So if you can make that work, that helps them out a lot. But their music is royalty-free. Tens of thousands of options on that site, maybe. And the best part about it is that they have a lot of different filters. So if you're looking for something specific, it can filter out its selections. In training, my favorite filter used is called corporate. So it's sort of corporate-y sounding, you know, lively, upbeat, sort of cheerful music. But there's all kinds of...
It's always what I think about, right? It's elevator type music.
It is. It's, you know, and look, I have a music degree. This is not my favorite type of music, right? But it's what is standard in the industry for this type of stuff. You know what I mean? But there's lots of filters. I don't mean like 5 or 6. There's tons of different filters, and you can filter by mood and genre and all kinds of different things to find what you want. I recommend picking tracks that, and this is another great thing about Pixabay, is you can sample the track, download it, but between those buttons in its UI, it has an audio waveform of the entire track. So it lets you sort of see how consistent the volume is throughout the track. And for this type of stuff, really, you can pick anything that you want if there's no voiceover. If there's voiceover throughout, I recommend picking something that has a fairly consistent waveform, meaning that it doesn't have ups and downs in volume a whole lot, right? It doesn't have a section that's real bombastic and then an interlude that's much softer, much more calm, and then gets bombastic again. The reason for that is that, you know, we'll probably talk about this here in a minute, and maybe it's a good transition to do it, but that when you are integrating this music into your video, you're going to want to bring the volume down, way down, because you're making training videos. the priority is not the music. The music is the sprinkles on top of the cake, right? The cake is the VO in what's being said. So the viewer has to be able to clearly understand what the person talking in the video is saying all the way throughout. And if you pick a track that's pretty consistent in volume throughout, it's going to be easier for you to integrate that. If you have a track that has large sections that are much more quiet, you can bring the whole track down to where the bombastic sections, the real loud sections, are at a good volume and under the VO speaker's voice, and then the music just drops away completely.
Yeah.
After that, for the quieter section. So it just makes it easier to balance the sound. But that's another great thing I like about the site is it's part of the preview. It shows you that waveform. So what you're looking for is what you're previewing, and then, oh, I like that one. Now I'll download it. Usually when I'm doing this, I'll go in there and I'll just download 5-6 tracks for a video that I like. And then I'm going to see what works best from there when I try to integrate it with the video.
And I want to go back a little bit just in case, and we'll set kind of the base here. So a waveform is just a visual representation of what the audio sounds like. So it's just a flat kind of 2D representation of the volume of that track. And I know there's probably a better way to say that, but I'm trying to think of a really basic way to explain what a waveform is. It's basically just for somebody that's never seen a waveform, like the taller it is, the louder it is, the more things that are going on in that song. The closer it is to the bottom, the softer it is, the less that you'll see. So, yeah, and that variation, as Ryan was talking about, that's really what you're looking at outside of the tone and the theme matching and all that. And we'll get into that in a second. But that's kind of at a basic level. That's all a waveform is. It's just a visual representation of what the song sounds like.
Yeah, and really anyone that's worked on training videos that's looking to add music, even if they don't know it, they've seen a waveform, because most of your video editing software, you're editing that video. There's like looks like a little cursive-y, scribbly thing that goes along with the audio. That's your waveform. Anytime you are working in audio editing software, you're going to see them as well. Maybe you're not.
Primarily what you're working on is the waveform. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about selection. And I mentioned a little bit of it there as far as like toning and theming and all that kind of stuff. How do you, like, when we're talking about actually adding music to a video, go into kind of some of the considerations there? Like the first consideration is just to make sure, like the first thing I'm thinking of is I want to make sure the theme of this music makes sense with whatever theme that I've chosen with this particular video. So like if my learning videos theme for whatever reason is like my character in a jungle, I'm not going to have like some kind of sci-fi music going on.
Right.
I feel like that's pretty basic. So once we set that aside, that's pretty easy to understand. What are some of the other considerations when we talk about adding background music to a learning video?
I mean, your standard learning video, maybe it's something that you're doing like a system tool tutorial or something, and it's just in the background. It's just something corporate-y, upbeat, cheerful is probably fine for that. Really, I mean, the more considerations come in when you are sort of telling a story. Maybe you have characters that have some sort of, however simple, character development that you might have over like multiple videos and different modules. You might want to be a little bit more cognizant there. In the past year for Lumius, I've worked on a couple of videos for charity for a childhood cancer association. And one of those videos used 2 different tracks because the first part of the video told the story of a child that died from cancer and that really resulted in the formation of this foundation. And the second part of the video was all about, this is what the foundation is doing. This is how we're helping these families with kids that have cancer. And so that was 2 completely different musical tracks that was used for it. The first half was much softer, heavy on the piano, sad music. essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about if you go to the movies and there's, of course, going to be a soundtrack to the movies, right? And you get to a sad scene, there's going to be sad music. And if you can sort of pull on your own experiences there, like, hey, I've seen this movie, this was a sad scene, this is sort of what the music sounded like, you can look for those types of tracks. And then the second half of that video was essentially like we wanted, I think, Eye of the Tiger for it. But of course, since it's copyrighted, you couldn't get it. But this was supposed to be very uplifting. It was, rock was sort of the theme of it. We're rocking these, people's lives here, trying to make things better. So it was very optimistic. And so it's completely different musical selection that you would choose there. But that's really where you're trying to convey emotion, where you're trying to tell a story. Those types of videos, you want to be very, very cognizant of that. But a lot of videos that we do, right, it's just, hey, we're going to list out a bullet points of stuff that HR needs you to do. We're going to list out, here's the steps to accomplish this task in this piece of software. And that can just, you go into like in Pixabay and just throw in the corporate, throw in upbeat, and you're going to get a good selection of stuff to pick.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk about, as we did in kind of some of our in our hardware discussion, let's go one step deeper into some of the details, right? So we've got our video, we've got our voiceover in, we've got our background music picked. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a little bit more detail. So what do we do if, let's say, our video is 2 minutes long, but our song is 2 minutes and 30 seconds long? So how do we do we just cut it off and let it end? We just chop off the end of it, right? That'll work.
So you can do that. You can do that. It's not the best way to go about it. I know a lot of people that's what they do. They will just chop it off, and then they'll add a fade effect to the end of it to where it just fades to nothing over the course of 2 or 3 seconds at the end of the video. You can do that. There's better ways to do it. And the reason that's not the best way to do it is that you are essentially randomly chopping a song off. There's zero logic to where you were ending that song, because that chopping off point is 100% dictated on the length of the video that you've made. Now, you don't want the music to dictate the length of the video. You want to try to avoid that. But we have some other options. It used to be, when I was working on this, I talked about some different considerations for musical selection. That used to be the last one, was I wanted something that was close enough in length to the video that I wanted to where I could kind of fudge a little bit here, a little bit there in the video to where they ended at the same time. And the advantages to your musical selection ending at the same time as your video is that it logically ends. You're not just cutting off in the middle of a musical statement. Again, you can get away with that, right? But it's not going to sound its best. Again, think about commercials again. How the ending of these songs are pretty well timed with the end of what they are showing you. And typically at the end of these sort of corporate happy-go-lucky songs is, some sort of exclamation mark and then its own fade without the music continuing. Something like da-da-da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. And it just makes it sound like the music was made for the video when you do it that way. So that would be an important consideration for me in the past. And the problem with that is that I would find 7, 8 tracks that I really wanted to use for this video. None of them were anywhere near the right length to make this work. So I would end up with something I didn't really want. It kind of works, and finding that would take a lot of time as well. That's the other thing to consider, is sometimes I would spend like a couple of hours just finding something that would work and fit. And then I found out that within the Adobe Creative Suite, and I'm sure there's other software that does this as well, it's probably not going to be your free options. Those are probably not going to be able to do this. But if you are using, say, Premiere Pro for a video or Audition, you can change the length of the song and you can have it work. It has something that is called a remix feature. And we can't really go into how to do that in a podcast, but if you're interested in this, just look up, Adobe Audition, Adobe Premiere Pro, something like that. Remix, change track length. and you'll get an article about how to do that. Basically what it does is you put in audio, an audio track, you have the option to tell it this is music, and first it'll analyze it a little bit. And then it'll say, hey, here's the length of it. And you can change that length. With that, there's going to be two different options. One's called stretch and one is called remix. Stretch, as it may sound, it will take the track and it will stretch it out to be longer or squish it together to be shorter. But what it's going to end up doing is, like, you try to make it shorter, it's going to sound like the Chipmunks, right? All it's doing is it's speeding it up or slowing it way down to make it longer. And that's not what we want. What Remix will do is it will analyze the file and it will look at how it loops, what its themes are, and it will systematically add and repeat or take out chunks that work logically with the music. So if you listen to music, a lot of times, there will be, maybe you listen to pop music or something, there's a chorus, right? And then you'll have another verse and chorus, another verse. All kinds of instrumental music, which, by the way, we should say instrumental music is what's best for this stuff. You don't want competing voices going. It will. Instrumental music has the same sort of cadence to it, where there will be repeating patterns. And the software will look at that and it will add and delete appropriately to where it gets that ending, that logical good ending, at the time that you want. Now, I have to be very specific here. This is a game changer for me when it comes to selecting music for learning videos, but don't expect to get it down to the second. I might say, okay, I want this track to be 57 seconds long. It might give me a minute and 2. Or I might say, okay, 56 seconds, and it gives me 52 seconds. And the reason for that is, again, like we talked about, these different logical loops and segments in the music, they're not 1 second intervals, right? If it's going to have it sound good, like it flows and it was meant to sound this way, it has to take seconds at a time off or added on. But what it can do is get you generally within like 6 seconds, 4, 5, 6 seconds. It depends on the track. It depends on how it's built musically, but it will get you close enough that then you can go and you can put it into your video, and you might, maybe you have a scene in the video. You might lengthen this scene by 1 second. You might let the distance between this VO file and this VO file breathe a half a second longer. And right. You can sort of add that up, and you can kind of manipulate that to where the video is still, it's still what you need. It's not, purposefully changed to be a certain length, but it's just fudged a little bit here and there to where your music track just ends right when the video ends. It works really well that way. So this function to me is a game changer. I can select whatever track I feel like is best for this video, and I don't even worry about the length, because I'll go and I will get it close enough to where I know now I can go put it in and I can make it work.
That's cool. I haven't seen that. I'll have to go check that out. And I know that you had posted something about that in our internal chat, and I still haven't had an opportunity to go look at it. I need to have it on my list as one of the many things I need to go take a look at. I haven't been able to take a look at it yet, but
if you want me to show you at some point, just let me know. My mind was blown by it. I was like, it really, what it comes down to is it speeds your process up. All that time I was spending finding something that was appropriate for the video and the right length, now is just what's appropriate for the video. And there's a lot more stuff out there that's appropriate for your video than stuff that's appropriate for your video and the right length.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you said it, like if you can get your background music and your VO and your visuals in sync at those crucial points like that, those crucial points being like the very beginning and the very end. And there's a couple, in the middle that your SMEs and stakeholders are looking for when you're hitting kind of your big learning points. But really for most, it's at the very beginning, at the very end. Those are where you can really tell if things aren't in tune. So if you can really get those two timings down really well, it just takes the feel of it being a professional quality up a level.
Agreed.
So
Quite a bit, yes. It's amazing what just adding a little bit of background music will do. And most people, honestly, and this is where I sort of have to check myself, since I have a music background. I tend to notice music a lot more than other people. Most people, they actually won't actively notice the music. There will just be something about the video that feels more polished.
Yep.
And that's really kind of what you're going for with that.
Yeah, and I can just attest, because I worked with Ryan on the video that he created for the charity, and every time I had to review it, I would cry. Like, the music in it was super powerful, and it brought about all this emotion. But it was like the moment the sad part was over, and the exciting, like, this is what we're doing to help families, like, you're like, okay, good, I'm good. But like, was I actively sitting there thinking like, I'm emotional because this music is making me emotional? No, it's just, it fit really well, and it brings everything together. And I to Ryan's point, I don't know that everybody thinks about it actively, but it's definitely impactful.
Yeah, it has its effect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like any video that you're making that is trying to convey emotion isn't going to do it anywhere near as well without music. Again, this goes back. This is why TV shows have soundtracks. This is why movies have soundtracks.
Yes.
This is why your commercials have soundtracks.
yeah, I mean,
all this type of video media has
think
music.
about the charity that uses the Sarah McLachlan with the
dog,
the dog
ESPCA.
adoption. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
like,
yes.
people can't even hear that song anymore without thinking about those commercials.
Can't with that song anymore. It's been, what, 20, 25 years, really, since it was like on all the time, at least.
Yeah.
So, but okay. So that's, we're running on time. So that's where we'll leave it. Apologize for reminding everybody about those terribly depressing commercials. But
thank you, Jeremy.
Ryan, yeah, anytime. We appreciate you joining us. And thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.